Now in the train, fleeing my parental home, with fresh hope and dreams. I was beginning to enjoy the blurring scenery outside. Several border security checks were conducted in places where the train stopped. One of them was in Sofia, where not only our tickets were checked, but our passports as well, and the officers took a lengthy period of time doing so. We were invited to an office to be questioned about the reason for our travel, where we were ultimately heading, for what duration, etc. That very first inspection was certainly not appealing, and we were told it was for security reasons, as there was some form of unrest in their country. Apparently, there had been a few shootings during the last few hours. That was worrying. Hopefully, we were not going to be stopped like that again. An even more worrying episode I observed was that some people were detained. But one of the officers, noticing my worried looks, approached me and said that I should not worry, for I was a student going into another country, and that everything was fine. When the train finally started to move, we were served light refreshments. I was once again left with my traumatic memories of home. Then an unusual calm came over me as I heard a friendly voice in my head, at first singing an unfamiliar song, perhaps just to calm my restless mind, later advising that this was the right way to start my lifelong adventure. It was exceedingly strange to feel so at ease and quite comfortable with the whole situation. Maybe my mind was creating the entertainment I needed. When in Budapest, we stopped again for a few minor checks, and again more snacks were served, with hot drinks. I was certainly happier about this journey, which I had dreamt about for a long time. I was even humming a lovely tune to myself, and wondering how many other people were experiencing similar emotions. A short while later, we arrived in Vienna, where there were many soldiers hurrying to and fro. We were told that we could leave our personal belongings in the train and go out into the station grounds, where coffee, tea, and snacks were available. The whole journey seemed to be organized for eating and drinking. Meanwhile, the compartments were to be inspected, and there was no need to worry about our luggage. I did not have much to worry about anyway, and so, calmed, I went into a coffee lounge, enjoyed a cup of hot chocolate and biscuits. I cannot forget how beautiful it tasted. However, seeing so many soldiers and security men wandering around did not make one feel at ease. One had no choice but wait for the announcements, while having 2 more cups of hot chocolate, sipping them very slowly. On the other hand, encountering smiling and happy faces was welcoming, and I was fully relaxed with this experience. Admittedly, I was very excited about this new adventure I had embarked on. Memories of some friends from my school and childhood days were so clear that it felt as if I could still hear their voices, their laughter, their singing, and all the nonsense we were engaged in. Hearing once again those invisible friends from my early childhood days was exciting, as they shared a few jokes and gave me advice about certain people and places. My childhood friend, Serapis, again clearly spoke to me as if I was listening to the radio, telling me that this was the first day of a new chapter in my life. He repeatedly advised me never to despair, as he was always going to be with me. That was very comforting, and yet at the same time something I needed to keep to myself. I knew that I had not developed a mental disorder, and was therefore happy talking with my invisible friends, even if it was only in my imagination. It looked promising, assuring me that it was going to be an exciting adventure. So many more thoughts passed through my mind. For instance, a vision in regard to my pre-Earthian existence of this was not the result of my colorful imagination. My being born, childhood, the wonderful times I had with those school friends, my brother, as well as the times we shared, were all so clear to me. After a while, a variety of concerns intermittently intruded into my thoughts. What will it be like for my mother? Perhaps, I thought, when things were favorable, we could get back together again. What if this was the final situation one could no longer change? However, going back to a place which my father preferred to live in permanently would present huge problems. There was no way that I could go back there, perhaps even being falsely accused of being a criminal, a spy, and be shot as it was during the war years, or being considered as being someone escaping one's duties to the homeland, which was not a home to me. Contrary to my father's unreasonable wishes, I did not desire to live a life of fear, or be regarded as if I was an undesirable dog in that country. In fact, I always felt like an undesirable tumor within a most beautiful and gorgeous place, and needed to be removed. The whole world knows how some minorities have been silenced and disappeared from time to time. Others living in different countries tend to talk about their experiences of persecution and unbearable sufferings, which they had to put up with. Allegedly, they caused some unrest within that country, therefore needing to leave, and where the authorities did not desire to be answerable for the past atrocities which no one could, in all honesty, deny happened. Even Hitler made mention of it. He said in one of his speeches, "Who will remember the Armenian genocide?" I was not interested in violence and destruction of human life. Therefore, doing conscription-based military service anywhere around the world, particularly in Turkey, was not my desire. I preferred to leave it to others who were better in doing so, and, in my case, without being anti, I did not want to have anything to do with them. I was not interested in any form of racism, nationalism, or any disrespect of people's beliefs. I was not interested in any religion, for I have witnessed so much hurt, even at that young age, and people suffered heartaches caused by it. I just wanted to be free from those aspects of the world, while working towards benefiting humanity in different creative ways. As I drifted deeper into my memories, I began to recall more from my days spent with those friends before this adventure. I remembered the occasion when one of my cousins introduced me to a Jehovah's Witness elder, Shahan. I was very curious about this encounter at the dry cleaning shop owned by Georg, and that one of his friends, Shahan, was going to visit him in the afternoon. It was apparently one of those regular visits. This was a kind of local tradition and very unique engagement amongst friends in Ankara. Georg had been befriended with his visitor for a long while. This gentleman was of Armenian background and was a witness, operating within the bounds and restrictions imposed upon him due to human rights issues in that country. He was convinced that the Lord Jesus had commanded his disciples to preach the good word unto all corners of the world before Armageddon, the end of all human endeavors. That was God's will, which he had to respect under all circumstances. During this meeting, Georg kept busy with his other customers, perhaps wanting to pass the ball to me, allegedly the brainless youngster, probably thinking I would benefit from this venture and become mature. Shahan eagerly wanted to invite me to one of his friends' homes the following week, where they were having a gathering, speaking all about the Bible truths. I was very curious. Although I found the subjects he was talking about fictitious, just like the science fiction books I used to read, with great interest, I thought it might be interesting to discover what others were thinking about issues of concern around the world. My childhood friend, whom I could converse with, just like in a daydream, without telling anything about it to anybody for fear of being reminded once more that I was dreaming, advised me about discovering the Bible as an historical study, although it did not need be, through Shahan and his friends. He told me it could be educational to see how others interpreted the Bible. However, knowing how anti my mother was towards those cultist movements, I had to find excuses when I wanted to go out, for I did not want to hurt her, just the same as when I went out with one of my girlfriends. My mother was very anxious about any pregnancy issues with those girls, as she had been urgently advising us, while also encouraging my brother to follow me like a chaperone. My curiosity got the better of me, and I went along with Shahan's invitation, and was introduced to other witnesses who explained why they called themselves brothers and sisters after being baptized into their faith. They spoke at length about why it was important to serve the Lord and preach the word of God all around the world. They read daily texts from their Bibles, and all those verses were underlined. What I could not understand was that they strictly denied Darwin's evolution theory and claimed the story of creation being the only truth. However, I was there as their guest, and although I could not accept their idea of how humanity was created and the Bible's explanation regarding the first man and woman, I enjoyed their friendliness. They almost always served hot and soft drinks with snacks, but I felt that everybody was living in fear in case someone had noticed them gathering and complained to the Turkish authorities. When and if there was a police raid on their premises, they immediately had to hide everything and pretend they were just friends visiting, chatting, and enjoying food together. The police officers, too, were invited to share the food, if and when they came in. From time to time I met with those witnesses during my stay in Ankara. I asked a number of intriguing questions, but many of them remained unanswered. For instance, they did not have an answer regarding when Adam and Eve had children and were commanded to multiply. How did they do it? Were they to have sex amongst members of their family? And if so, why did the laws of today forbid brothers and sisters marrying each other? Why, according to the Bible, was it seen as sin? How can we believe that God loved the world so much and sent his only begotten Son to remove their sins? If God loved the world so much, as we discover in the Scriptures, how come he so easily destroyed humanity with a terrible flood and confused their tongues when they built a tower? If Jesus was the Lamb of God and was sacrificed to wash clean the sins of mankind, why were newborn babies still considered sinners? Shahan wanted to meet me from time to time to talk all about that, just like Vahan's younger brother he was talking to on a regular basis. Vahan was also a dedicated servant of God. At the time, I found those discussions refreshing, while discovering what others were thinking was exciting. However, my interests were different, and I could not commit myself to their way of thinking and doing things contrary to the laws of the land. Besides, knowing that some of them had been caught like criminals and jailed for short periods of time for any kind of missionary work, being considered as a national security threat, I could not understand what presented such a problem. I concluded that in all Muslim countries it would be understood as being against the teachings of a 7th century religion. Their secular teachings remained as the only truth, and any other activity from Christian quarters could be punishable, even by death. Therefore, the activities of the witnesses had to be suppressed. That made me even more interested in discovering why they were so extraordinarily different without becoming one of them, instead just observing. However, with my limited knowledge, having occasionally read passages from the Bible, just like we were encouraged to do, reciting texts in parrot fashion within the Catholic Orthodox system, I was able to comment on some of the Bible verses. Upon this, my new friends thought of me as being a God-loving young man. It was so strange to discover one needed to utter those verses from the Scriptures to be classified as God-loving. The practices of the witnesses in Turkey was seen in the same light as the Mormons and other Christian students of theology. It was not possible to practice their religions, as in all other democratic countries around the world, for in Turkey they wanted to control even the minds of their citizens. This attitude of their authorities and hatred of Christians was so evident from within their traditional values that leaving it all behind was the only wise choice, especially after reading in their newspapers about the public executions of Christian missionaries. One was able to see the state of the country where no human rights were respected. Shahan had been jailed several times for that reason. He created the impression of a very friendly and helpful person, and was a great classical pianist. However, he was completely dedicated and determined to only pursue his preaching and congregational overseeing activities, so he decided to sell his grand piano to pay the debts incurred for his legal costs. He even tried to teach me how best one should shave one's facial hair to look one's best. It made him feel like an older brother teaching his younger sibling. In reality, I was neither interested nor fully cognizant with their teachings in absolute terms, other than being curious about how others thought of life. I was so certain that even at that age, I could not be persuaded into believing anything. I was not interested in any religion, but rather in science, discovery, and peace all around the world. Would it not be wonderful if people could forget all their differences, religious fanaticisms, putting more time and energy into building a great future in the world? I was saddened about man's inhumanity to man. My new friends continued to meet in private homes in Istanbul and Ankara, for they were not allowed to have a place of worship which they called a kingdom hall, like others had all around the world, except in some Muslim countries. I spent my schooling and holidays partially in Ankara, and I was never at home there, and it never felt like one. It was like a prolonged stay with the expectancy that I would serve the country against my will, where I was nothing other than an unwanted foreigner. The educational system was not too different in comparison with European ones. However, there were certain activities in European schools, as with the Catholic schools in Paris, where we had school choirs, boy choristers, and perhaps more color. Christian schools taught everything needed, and some of their students were encouraged to become theologians, priests, or nuns. In Ankara, schooling was almost always based on Turkish nationalism, and partially Islamic studies were encouraged. Personally, I found the Parisian educational system to be superior, and the intelligence levels of European children higher. Then again, if I did not spend all that time where I was, I would probably not have had those colorful experiences with people I encountered. Şahan's brother, Bejo, was also living in Istanbul, and I was unsure whether they had both spent their childhood there. I became an individual at an earlier age, accepting people as they were, just as I do today. Where they came from was unimportant. All I was interested in was that they were friendly to each other, without any regret or doubts, and accepted me as their friend, without any other attachment. Bejo was a very free-going person, remaining within the bounds of good morals, and did not take things very seriously. I did not think he was in total agreement with things Şahan adhered to. We frequented a number of their gatherings, most of which were simply for social engagements, like sharing food and talking about current affairs. However, when invited to each other's homes for more important reasons, like studying the Bible or listening to a talk given by a district minister, it was taken very seriously. I did not attend all their gatherings or take their teachings as being the absolute truth, as they did. However, their peaceful and logical attitudes were very pleasing, although their fanatical adherence to scriptural wisdom was not at all feasible, often illogical. They could not provide me with answers I sought unless it was available in their own publications through extracted information from a select group of authors presented in a biased way to please those who adhered to their philosophy. This was my first impression of them, and those writers always remained unanimous, never revealing their identity. Members were encouraged to read not only daily texts from the Bible to ponder upon during the day, but also to concentrate on monthly and yearly texts as they appeared on their calendars and yearbooks. Those calendars carried beautifully colorful and pleasant-looking illustrations. Within those fanatical and restrictive countries, American-originated printed material on finest rice paper in the local language was sent by witnesses from anywhere around the world. They were very light in weight and gave the impression of ordinary letters from friends in overseas countries, and were studied seriously within their groups. What amazed me most was that they were underlined and questions considered have been responded to as relative to those texts. This system was very cleverly disguised and tactfully executed. This way the authorities could not detect anything supposedly wrong, and persecute people falsely, even perhaps accusing them of spying in Turkey. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, adherence to any belief system other than Islam, any type of missionary work or preaching was not permitted, and severely punishable by the laws within their allegedly democratic system. Since house-to-house and door-to-door activities or witnesses could not be conducted in Muslim countries, let alone in Turkey, Shahan used to invite me occasionally to go with him to visit and have a little chat with people he recently met in their workplaces. Sometimes, during my school holidays, and when I did not need to be at my part-time work while in Ankara, I found it to be an interesting pastime, as I was able to learn about people and their interests, thus making comparisons with others in different places I frequented. This also helped me discover how fanatical people could be about their faith within the Muslim world, and also with the witnesses. Admittedly, the more I discovered about the witnesses, the less interested I became. Allegedly, they were the only people knowing the truth, for apparently the good Lord had granted them wisdom to grasp who God was. The end was nigh, and the world could end in 1969 or later, and although we could not be too sure about it, for only God would know the day and the time, if we adhered to the witness teachings, we would at least have the chance to live forever. But one had to be dedicated to God unconditionally. The good God would then keep his promise and give us eternal physical life in the New World Order. However, my questions still remained unanswered. The only encouragement one was offered was to follow those teachings as Bible truths. Personally, creating neutral friendships was more important than following any blind faith. Fanaticism in any guise is not acceptable. Even my childhood friend, who is invisible to the world, advised me to remain just as friends with those newly discovered associates. Apart from their religious ideals, they were generally very nice people. However, my invisible friend was extremely real to me, for he often proved his existence. He still remains my beloved friend even today. He has always been reliable in all circumstances, and more real than can be imagined by the average mind. But I chose to stay as good friends with those witnesses. Then again, I preferred always to be friends with everybody, as I still do.